See, the problem when I produce these shows myself, I don't have the fun 60-second countdown graphic that the real producers have while we wait for people to populate in the room, including one of our guests. So, I'll just filibuster for another second and see if we can find our other guest, and then we'll get the show going in a second. It's not as much fun as the generic music that you sometimes hear on these shows, but you get what you get. You get 30 seconds of me filibustering instead. Hello and welcome to a very special presentation of In the Money Media. This is our Pegasus Day Pick Six show. Really excited to be on the airwaves with you. We've got two great guests, one of whom will be along in just a minute's time, but I'll right now introduce the first one back on these In the Money airwaves after a brief absence. Always a pleasure to speak with TV's Matt Bernier. Matt, how are things?
I'm good, Pete. Looking forward to seeing you down here this weekend. It's been fantastic weather lately, and it looks like it's only going to get better over the week. Time as ever to talk Pegasus.
I heard some Floridians out there complaining about the weather lately in Florida. Now, as a Northeasterner, I trust your perspective on this. Are they complaining because it's been like 65 instead of 70, or has it been a little ropey down there?
Pete, I've gotten soft in a short amount of time. I was even complaining about 65 and a little bit of a breeze. It's all relative, right? When you're used to one thing and all of a sudden it changes. I got soft in a matter of like 8 weeks, but no, it's now finally, this is Florida weather. This is 80 degrees, sunshine, a little bit of a breeze. You couldn't ask for more. And like I said, I think it's only supposed to warm up over the weekend. So if firm turf is your kind of thing and a fast main track, Gulfstream's where to be.
I'm super excited to talk to you about these races. We'll wait another minute for our other guests to arrive. I'll ask you more generally, just how you've been enjoying the South Florida lifestyle, what you've been thinking generally of like the way these tracks have been playing at Gulfstream, and how you've been, making the adjustment to being back down in South Florida.
It's been fun. As far as the racing is concerned, I think it's been very good. It's good that we had a bad stretch of rain for a few weeks that washed a ton of races off the grass. And it seemed like constant Tapeta card after Tapeta card. And I'm a fan of the synthetic. I don't have a problem with it, but it just, it kind of changes your outlook on going into some of these cards. I don't know it'll be such a big deal on Saturday because we've only got a couple of synthetic races, but the most obvious and significant sort of, I don't want to call them biases, but track profiles, sprinting on Tapeta, you better be up on the lead or pushing it. Otherwise, you don't really have much of a chance. And the same goes for those 5 furlong turf sprints, where that's not really breaking any news. I finally bought in to the JK methodology of just give me the gas, give me the horse that's going to make the front and let them go. And guess what? It's right more often than not. So those are the two kind of pressing ones. By and large, this is a new turf course. I think it's been very, very fair, very consistent. Speed does well. If you're good enough to come from out of the clouds, you can do so. And the main track, I would say it's just kind of your standard Gulfstream. You have days where it's a little bit kinder to speed, but by and large, I think it's been a very fair, even playing surface.
Got a comment from Rob. If you make comments, once we get into the meat of the handicapping, I'll try to answer as many as I can. It gets to be a bit of a fire drill sometimes, and if I miss you, I apologize, but we'll throw up as many as we can along the way. Rob just observing about Gulfstream doing a good job of managing the turf course, keeping most of the sprints on synthetic, I guess, meaning like they've had to move some races over, but a lot's been able to stay on. And the great thing about synthetic, bias or no, at least the fields hold together. You know what I mean? As opposed to having just it be the scratch fest that it can be.
And that's what really, I think the onus for the Tapeta has been, really, not just down here, but you're seeing many other places. New York is going to put one in at Belmont Park, where instead of having these fields that would have been full fields on turf scratched off onto the main track that's sloppy and you got a field of 4 or 5, now you've got basically a nice full field that more or less stays together on the Tapeta. Plays a little bit differently, but I think it's one of those that if you just pay enough attention, you're going to be okay.
We have some funny comments here. Well, this one isn't funny. This is just Pete Appleby saying he misses you. Somebody points out the irony of that we're doing this during the Eclipse Award ceremony. To be honest, I didn't think about that. It certainly was not meant to be a diss. I'm very interested in what's going on in the Eclipse Awards. Buddy's up for the Steeplechase Award, 10 Strike Racing and River D, other people receiving. But when it's all hands on deck, when you get a week like Pegasus week. This is when we can do it. And it's an on-demand world. You can watch this on demand. You can watch the Eclipse Awards on demand. Certainly no offense meant by that, but I'm glad, Fairway, that you pointed it out just so I could say that explicitly and nobody took it as a thumb in the eye.
I would be up there, but my wife is out with a girlfriend tonight, and I am on dad duty. So if you hear someone screaming in the other room, it's the kiddo.
Well,
I apologize.
We'll cover for you because you've got a very sympathetic audience for that type of thing, and me, and in the man that I'm about to introduce, coming to us now from Texas, we bring in Nick Tammaro. Nick, and are you on daddy duty? Any chance we're going to get a child interruption in your side of the screen tonight?
No, I was on Philly Joe airport retrieval duty, so that's why I'm a few minutes tardy. Who has already deemed Houston traffic as bad as any he's seen in America, and he is from, of course, the city of brotherly love. So, yeah, we're no, actually, my daughter is in school now, so she just went to bed. So,
gotcha.
Telling you, it's a little tuition. That's what it gets you.
Non-zero chance my daughter will appear and tell me that she's too excited to sleep after her successful, I'm brag a little, her successful red tip belt Taekwondo exam. She may appear at some point. All right, we've had some
I think actually if you have any footage of parents Taekwondo perform or Taekwondo test, I think that'd be more appealing to me than the Eclipse Awards. So just
I did just tweet it. Funny enough that you mentioned that. It's a tremendous.
There's a large television here. I'm going to add it to. But.
All right, let's get into the meat. Let's get to why we're here. I see the comments coming in. I love that. Again, we'll get to as many as we can. You'd help me out, viewers. If you can ask questions about a race as we're talking about the race, I will really do my best to try to get to some of those. Others I might just flash up on screen without comment, just so at least we can acknowledge your contributions to the show, which we really do appreciate. The pick 6 starts off in race number 8. Actually, I should ask you guys first, and no obligation here, obviously putting you on the spot, but is there anything in the first 7 races that you'd feel remiss if we didn't have a chance to talk about? I really focused on the latter half of the card, but there is some very interesting stuff early on. Anything leap out at you?
I haven't gotten that far. I've only looked at the back half, so
no worries. No
worries. Going ahead.
Oh, it was an on the spot question. I just didn't want to be accused of a host fail if we went off air and then Nick said, "Oh, my best bet was in the 4th" or something. I just wanted to prevent that from happening. How about you, Nick?
I would do something like that, wouldn't I? I would sandbag you like that and make it look like I was holding it in abeyance. But no, I mean, there are a couple of interesting races in the early portion, and I've got a little bit of work to do on the newly turned 3-year-old race. Of course, that's the maiden special that yielded Mage last year. It's got a much bigger field this year. I will say I think the likeliest winner on the entire card is Romagna Mia, who's on the rail in the La Prévoyante, which is the 6. She looked really good winning that Via Borghese. And I know it was rained off the turf and put on the synthetic, but she looked really good winning the Dowager as well. So she looks like a really nice distance filly. And so she comes up, at least there's a couple of races before the pick 6 sequence. So, maybe if you're playing some of those middle pick action, pick 4, pick 5 in the middle of the card, I think she's one you can probably lean on pretty strongly.
Jim asked a very good question here, just a wagering strategy type question about the fact that we have this tropical turf pick 3, which we have a whole other show on, by the way, which is all races within the pick 6, and saying maybe that's better value. And I can't disagree. There will be a mandatory payout on Sunday. We've seen from some of the numbers, though, that even those aren't necessarily, they're enticing. They're going to be big pools. But I mean, for me, the decision to play the pick 6, it really all comes down to your opinion. I mean, if you have an opinion where you think you're going to be able to get paid despite what the effective takeout is, I'm not going to judge anybody for wanting to play the pick 6. I mean, to be honest, we do these sequences because there's a couple of reasons. Tracks love it. It's easier for guests when we say we're going to do the pick 6, but along the way here, hopefully we're going to come up with either some vertical ideas or some other potential wagers to play. And the tropical turf pick 3, which is encompassed in these 6 races, is certainly a good one of those. So that was a very excellent observation from Jim. But that notwithstanding, we are going to be looking at the pick 6, starting with this McKnight grade 3 action, going 1.5 miles, a race where Chad Brown, who has not had the strongest meet of his life, sends out the top 2 favorites here in the form of Francesco Clemente and Stone Age. Nick, I'll start with you. Are you with these favorites or against them?
Well, I wouldn't bet Stone Age with Monopoly money. I've seen enough of Stone Age. I've had quite enough. No, I like Verstappen. I don't. So Francesco Clemente can win this race, but this horse has been wildly overbet in all 3 U.S. starts. I know he won 2 back at Aqueduct, and I guess he probably should have won in the Hollywood Turf Cup, but you're taking your life in your hands with a horse like this every time going long on the turf. Now he's got to negotiate a trip I know he's inside, which is good from a ground saving perspective, but he's got to try and work through what will almost certainly be some traffic when you're coming from, arguably 8 to 10 plus lengths off of this. And he's just the kind of horse to me that you're supposed to be betting against. The other thing, and look, Chad's record right now is a little bit worse than you would ever expect, right? I don't recall the last time he started to meet. I don't think he's ever started to meet this slowly in his entire career, but Chad does not treat this time of year as particularly important. This is the time of year where his stable really becomes somewhat dormant, and he's not pointing horses to the McKnight. Late breaking news. So I thought Verstappen actually in a way. So I guess to answer your question and keep us on point, no, I'm against both Stone Age and Francesco Clemente.
Verstappen makes sense. That would be my top pick in the race.
Verstappen, yeah. I mean, I could segue right into my pick, right? So I thought Verstappen kind of quietly ran a lot of really good races last year. I mean, I think he ran, obviously he ran well in the spring in the Elkhorn, but he came back with some credible races in some really odd spots, right? He ran at Indiana, Horseshoe Indianapolis. He ran at Saratoga. He arguably ran, one of the better races in the Bowling Green, given how close he was to the pace, and that Channel Maker ran a little bit better. Obviously, he was wide in the Kentucky Downs Turf Cup. That was obviously when you wanted to be inside, and he ended the season with a really good effort in the Red Smith. I mean, watching the replay back, I knew this horse ran well when I first watched it. I watched the replay and was like, man, he was best in there. He was always within the teeth of that pace. Made the first move as the runaway leaders kind of came back to him. And I'll take a horse off of that kind of trip. I like Dettori getting on. Brendan Walsh started to meet a little slowly too, but this horse is the right kind of price for me.
Heating up for sure. Any backups you want to name check in this spot, or is it really Verstappen or bust for you?
I mean, I'll use I really don't have a lot of backups that I want. It is kind of Verstappen or bust. I don't want to be too married to him. I could see myself using Francesco Clemente as a backup. I don't want to necessarily be completely beaten by him. He's just not a horse I would really ever bet to win.
Matt, let's bring you back in to get your views on this one. Nick and I both with Verstappen. I could tell you a story about Cellist as a long shot off that Sycamore running line that makes me think maybe there's a world in which he could wire him at a price. But where are you in the McKnight?
I echo Nick's sentiments on Stone Age. You couldn't pay me to bet that horse. I just don't think he's that good, frankly. I don't really know where that second in the Breeders' Cup came from a couple of years ago. Probably more an indictment on that field than anything else. Francesco Clemente, he can win for certain. If you're playing the multis, I guess it depends what you think of the sequence down the road. I would be using him probably defensively. I like Verstappen. I like the 11 Anglophile. His 2 runs at 1.25 miles or longer, they're both wins. And I know he's only got 2 10 furlong races, but I wonder if that's what he's kind of wanted all along. But I'm going to go with Cellist. You mentioned him, Pete. I think this is by and large a paceless race. And I guess it depends what Brand Sonata does. If he gets into the other race or they end up here, I don't really look at him as a 1.5 mile kind of horse. They tried it before. It hasn't worked. Cellist, I think you can make an argument that maybe more often than not a bridesmaid as opposed to a bride. But I don't care about the 2 Churchill races. That turf course was goofy over the back half of the year. They probably shouldn't have been running on it anyway by the very end of it. And I think his other races this year have all been very strong, including that stake at Turfway where he had a bit of an issue at the start and still came with a run. I think he's better when they put him up on the engine. And I just don't think there's a lot of speed in this race. So Cellist would kind of be where I'm going to go.
I like the sound of that. 7-8, really 8-7 for you than 7-8. Am I getting that right, Matt?
Yeah, I would go 7, 8, and 11 in there.
7, 8, 11 for Matt. You gave that nice shout for Anglophile too, a horse that I know that Brian Natto gave a good shout to on the Players podcast that will be dropping soon. Let's pivot to race number 9. We've got graded stakes action in the form of the Inside Information. Grade 2 for fillies and mares, 4 and up, 7 furlongs on the dirt. I was really uncreative in this spot. So I'll just confess to that first, and was thinking there were worse ideas than potentially trying to lock it up with the likes of Maryquitecontrary and Intrepid Daydream. Matt, can you offer me anything more creative than my chalky thoughts on this one?
No, not as far as Mary is concerned. I just think she's the best horse in the race. And my real opinion is I don't want anyone from the Sugar Swirl. Maybe that's going to end up being the kiss of death, but I just don't like races where you've got 5 horses separated by a length and a half on the dirt. I thought it was a day that Speed did well on the main track. If you wanted a horse out of that, maybe it is Intrepid Daydream, because she really hadn't been based down here at all. She shipped in from Laurel. She went into Saffy's barn. She ran probably against the bias a little bit. Now with the start under her belt, she probably improves, but I just think Maryquitecontrary is a better horse than these are, frankly. And she loves it at Gulfstream, 7 wins from 9 starts. She's never been out of the exacta. If you were looking for a really crazy horse, I don't think she's this good, and I don't think she wants to go this far. But Sassy Nature, should she go, if they just let her go and think that she's going to stop at some point, maybe she can get brave. But for me, it would be Lone A would be the 9.
Yeah, and I mean, the time form pace projector gives some sympathy for that idea of Sassy Nature potentially leading them a long way if she can make the surface adjustment that would be needed to do so. Nick, how about you? Can you reach for something at a longer price? Do you think you can lock this up at the lower end of the market?
I mean, I've been skeptical of Maryquitecontrary a few times, and she's stuffed me in a locker, as you like to say, Peach. I'm done with that. I thought her Rampart was very solid. It was not the greatest field, obviously, but she didn't really have much reason to win that race, and she still did. They didn't really go in front of her. She had to kind of wait for a bit. There was a little bit of movement to her outside before she got herself into a decent spot, and she really finished. She's just a horse that's remarkably consistent. She obviously loves Gulfstream, and I think the version of Maryquitecontrary that I think we hoped would show up at Saratoga last year never really did, but the Gulfstream version is just a different animal. So I'm not going to spend really any money at all to try and beat her. It's her or nothing for me, because I agree with Matt. I don't like the Sugar Swirl. I think that Intrepid Daydream, in a way, looks a little bit like Fool's Gold to me. And I think that because she had run a fast race prior at Laurel, I think the figure in the Sugar Swirl might be a little bit high. So I'm looking elsewhere. I think this is Maryquitecontrary or bust.
Let's go to leg C of the pick 6, which would also be the middle leg of the pick 3. Lots of positive comments about the all turf pick 3, the tropical turf pick 3. And I have to say, I agree. I've been extremely impressed by how well this bet has been paying on a regular basis, even with favorites. I think a combination of that low takeout and that high minimum, which in a subtle way, it's some people think I'm nuts when I say this, but believe me, I think if you do the math, if you really look at it, that high minimum actually helps players by making the pools a little bit less efficient, and also by forcing horse players to have to stick with some opinions and not get too spready. So we'll see if we can keep these tropical turf pick 3s and these pick 6s going in the Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf grade 2 action with a big full field. And Nick, I'm going to ask you the first question, and it has to do with the figure of Star Fortress the last day. This Matt was talking about the turf course and how unusually it was playing last fall at Churchill Downs. This was the only turf race run that day. There was moisture in the turf. Lots of reasons to question it, except for the fact that the horses that have come back out of it seem to be completely validating the figure. It leaves me kind of wanting to throw up my hands and not knowing quite what to do with Star Fortress at the end of the day. Nick, what do you think of this figure specifically? Talk about the challenges of making a figure on a day like this.
Yeah, by far and away the most interesting horse running on Saturday, in my opinion. Who knows what Star Fortress is, right? I mean, what we know is that she ran extremely well in the Cardinal. Obviously, and I was doing another show earlier today for Twin Spires, and I said, horses don't win by 10 plus lengths on the turf, 10 or more, even really 6 or more, unless you're talking about a pretty extreme scenario with regards to surface and condition. And I think it's safe to say that it was just a turf course that she handled when really nobody else did. And so unless you're going to take the approach that maybe she prefers something that's a little spongier, a little softer under her feet, I kind of think you're supposed to take that race at face value. I think that's just a mistake you're supposed to make. And if she loses this race at 2-1 or so, you say, okay, well, it was kind of a fluke. But otherwise, as you said, I mean, they validated that race pretty nicely coming back out of it. And it's not like she just ran pretty well. She ran extremely well. She's also in the hands of a really excellent horsewoman in Cherie DeVaux, who clearly had an eye on saving her for this race coming out of that big performance. So I can't wait to see how she performs. I mean, looking at just pretty much any speed figure at all, 126 time form, a 0 thoroughgraph number. I mean, no matter what you look at, this was just an insanely fast race, and I'm hopeful because racing needs stars pretty much at any time, that race was just a precursor to what we're going to end up getting from Star Fortress, because it was damn good.
Your passion as a fan comes through, and it's awesome. But what about from a strictly wagering point of view on Saturday? Is she one you feel comfortable singling, or do you need others to back her up?
I mean, I'm not completely comfortable singling her, just because I do think Fluffy Socks can win this race. And I know it's sort of funny to say that Star Fortress might be the most interesting horse on the card, and then say I'm going to help her out with sort of a career loser. But Fluffy Socks is a horse that I do think has overcome some adversity at various points in time. I thought she actually ran very well in the Matriarch last time out, and she's kind of the atypical Chad Brown horse that you'd see this time of year, in that, I mean, Fluffy Socks just kind of continues to run. She just runs and runs and runs, and there aren't a lot of horses that Chad runs on a regular basis that are graded stakes types as frequently as he runs her. I know it sounds ridiculous that she's run 11 times in the last 2 years, but still, she seems to fire just about every time, and she's going to get enough pace to run at. I'd imagine that Accomplished Girl will show more speed this time around than she did last time. It was her stablemate, Sister Luann, that did a little bit more of the heavy lifting early, so it feels like there'll be enough pace to set things up in here, with Ruby Nell obviously in there setting the tempo. So I'd go a little 4-7. I'd use the 9 Didia a little bit more so as a backup. I have a hard time poking holes in her resume. She's been a pretty nice horse now for the last couple of years.
Some really interesting runners in here. I mean, the 3 that you mentioned, I'm very much interested in. I could try to tell you a story about a runner like Mission of Joy, even as a rising 4-year-old, going to be tested for class, has to get a little bit faster, but might be the right price, might be in the right hands to do exactly that. For me, this is definitely a spread, survive, advance race. I'm not going to count out Ruby Nell. I agree with what you're saying in theory about there being a ton of pace, but I like the idea of trying to have, and whatever I do, I want to have some Ruby Nell and some Fluffy Socks, just with the idea we talk about all the time on these shows about trying to have who we think is the best speed and the best closer. I can't really help in this race just because I'm so darn spready. 4, 6, 7, 9, 11. Matt, how about you? Any clarity for you when it comes to this filly and mare turf?
Yeah, just 4, 6 for me. The idea with Ruby Nell, I understand maybe there is some other speed that can hook her, and maybe, I don't want to say she was exposed to the Matriarch against better horses, but I wouldn't fault anyone that looks at it and says that's kind of the acid test and she didn't quite pass it. But to me, the fact that Mandela is putting her on a plane, we talked about it earlier today. Mandela, when he ships to the East Coast, he does it few and far between, but typically he's only doing it if the horse can win. He did it with the Haskell. It had been something nearly 25 years, same since his last try here at Gulfstream. It's been 25 years, and that was a win. I'm not saying that that's why that she would or wouldn't win, but the point being, he's only going to put a horse on a plane that he actually thinks has a chance. But to Nick's point, and actually a question for Nick, am I wrong? Was the fig initially a 110 for Star Fortress?
I think it was, yeah. I'm almost positive that's right.
Because,
in fact, I remember, yeah.
Because I just remember talking with Caleb Keller about it the next day, and I was like, she had to run something like 100, and then it came back, and I was like, she ran a freaking 110. She ran a hole in the wind. If she does anything close to that here, you're not just looking at, the star of Saturday. You're probably looking at a likely Breeders' Cup kind of winner if she maintains that form. I get it. You got a long way to go. But for Cherie DeVaux to have a horse like this in the first start in the U.S., a trainer that typically I think you see better with a little bit of time, sky's the limit. I don't know if you want to take that sort of fig and look at it kind of, squint around a little bit. I'm with Nick, though. I think you're supposed to approach it kind of as what it is. She came back and she worked 59 and change around the dogs the other day at Palm Meadows. I have no reason to think that she won't run well on Saturday.
And I should clarify when I talk about Fluffy Socks potentially being the best closer. If the real Star Goddess shows up, she's the best closer. But just in my little world, in my little headcanon where I'm trying to tell a story where I can beat her, that's where I end up with Fluffy Socks. In just the theory that for whatever reason that race proves to be illusory. It probably won't, and there will be Star Goddess on my tickets. I will just be very likely losing equity in this race in bets should she go in. Let's talk about race number 11, the Hooper. Great reaction going a mile on the turf, and say it with me, big full field. Here, the question I think we have to begin with is Hejazi. How good is he? Are we with or against, Nick?
I mean, I think this is a little too much for him. The inside post, the likely pace scenario he faces, the fact that he's got speed immediately to his outside and in a couple of other spots in there. Look, I'm not going to be shocked if this horse ends up getting the lead and fending everybody off the entire way. I don't like the prospect of it at sub 2-1. And there are just way too many interesting horses for me in here to take him. I'm most intrigued by the 3 Steel Sunshine and the 12 Signator. I think they each have something to offer. They're both off the pace horses. Steel Sunshine, I thought, ran a very credible race last time out. And obviously we've seen that the Harlan's Holiday has been productive in that Lure Him In and Octane came back and ran 1-2. I know it was in a Florida bred race, but Lure Him In really had the tougher trip in there and came back and won his next start. I thought it was a nice forward move for Steel Sunshine. He looks to be going the right direction figure-wise. Now he's second off a layoff. He's a Gulfstream lover. He just seemed to make a lot of sense to me. And I think Signator's effort in the Queens County was a lot better than it looks on paper. I love our man Brian Nato. There's not a chance in hell this horse is 15-1. He's going to be probably a third of that with these connections. And this is a popular horse anyway. And I take enough heat about morning lines that I can make a comment like that.
I was going to say Brian's going to file that away and wait till he sees one at Keeneland, and he's going to pick on
Brian
you
knows. Right, Brian knows I love him. He knows these races are hard. You know, they're hard when they're so contentious, and in a race like this where you're trying to really get it. You're trying to guess basically how nuts the public is going to go for Hejazi, knowing that he's going to get a lot of support too. You start making him 8-5 in a 12-horse race, you run out of points pretty quick. So, but Signator's a West Point horse from Shug with, a lot of 90+ buyer speed figures and kind of a forward-looking pattern. He's a horse who's going to take an awful lot of money in here. So, 3 and 12 for me primarily. I'll use the 1 a little bit, probably more so as a C. I'll use the 8 Accretive a little bit as well. He was wide in the Cigar Mile. I really don't know how good he is when push comes to shove, but I know he didn't really have an optimal chance to put anything good really forth in the Cigar Mile.
You mentioned all the horses I wanted to talk about. I 3, 8, 11, 3, 8, 12 were the numbers that I wrote down. I was going to ask you if I was nuts for not quite being ready to quit Accretive yet. You made excellent points on the
one more try.
What's that?
One more try. That's it. That's all Accretive gets.
That's
one
it.
more shot.
He's on the list. He's on notice. Matt, how about you? Are you with us on wanting to try to lean against Hejazi in this spot, or are we making this race more complicated than it is?
No, I mean, this is becoming a very boring podcast. I like Steel Sunshine right on top. I thought the Harlan's Holiday was much better than Luke's effort. He was parked wide every step of the way. It was a race that largely held up as far as the pace was concerned. O'Connor made a little bit of a move from a couple lengths off of it, but he was pretty close to it throughout as well. Steel Sunshine, I thought, did the most running in there, and I like this turn back for him. I think at heart, he's a one-turn kind of horse. The other horse for me is Signator on the outside. I agree with Nick. He's going to be a fraction of that price. Maybe I'm a little bit harder about that Queens County. I thought he was supposed to beat Krupe. I don't think much of Krupe. That's just me. But then again, he's basically run 1.25 miles in each of his last races. So I think he's a really talented horse. I thought it was a little odd that they put him on the van to go north to run in that Queens County because he was also entered here in one of the races. I don't remember if it was the Harlan's Holiday or the other race. But point being, I think there's some ability in here. I think he can run. If I was going to throw a wild card in there, I don't know how good he is, but Tumbarumba, second for Lynch, he's going to be a big number. He's 8. I could see him floating up from that Louisiana bred race. There was only 3 other horses in there, but his numbers all kind of stack up. He's pretty close, I think. And he's one that won't be completely outrun early on, I don't think, but he's going to get the jump on the deepest of the deep closers. And as far as Hejazi goes, I'm not way against him, but he hasn't gotten appreciably better at any point in his career. He just kind of runs the same race. And maybe it's good enough. But to Nick's point, from the rail with other speed in here, it's also just odd that Baffert puts him on the plane. I think this may be a stopgap to send him to the Middle East.
Step on the way. I wouldn't shock me. I'll say this: if speed looks good, if the inside looks good, I may completely rewrite my opinion of this race and dial down into him a little bit more. But I'm sort of hoping it's if it's more the typical track where speed's good, but the rail isn't necessarily great, and the chance he could get pinned down inside there, I'd like to try to beat him and pick up some equity in these various bets. Let's pivot to race number 12, the Pegasus World Cup Turf. This race is pretty interesting with the international participation. Grade 1 going 1 mile and 1/8. I won't start this typically. I'll start this because we had a question I can pop up very specifically about Masterpiece as potentially being an upsetter as part of the Rick Dutrow reunion tour. I have to say, the more I grind on this race, the more I do think the way that I'm seeing it shake out, I think I'm going, because I'm going to, foolish though it may be, probably try to take on Warm Heart here to some degree. And if I do that, it'll allow me to include a runner like Masterpiece. Either of you guys have any use for Masterpiece before we dissect this race in the normal way?
I mean, I can see him running well. I don't love him. I don't hate him. I'm sort of ambivalent on him.
8 to 10 to 1 type. That feels like the price to you, Matt.
Yeah.
I'm hearing.
Yeah, I would say 10 seems about right.
What are your thoughts
Yeah,
on him?
I mean, I don't think he has a particularly big look at winning. I'm not going to be shocked if he gets a piece of it. I think push comes to shove, he's probably better going longer. Rick Dutrow also made a comment, and Rick Dutrow is sort of bizarrely transparent when it comes to stuff like this. He said the horse really is better in cooler weather. And so I wonder if that's kind of a bit of a problem. Rick's had a million stories for horses over the years, right? Which ones had bad teeth, who needed time between races, stuff like that's a popular one, obviously. But yeah, I mean, he ran well. He's an annoying last time was the time horse if you like him in here, because 10 to 1, even from the outside post in the Brett Smith, was a hell of a price, especially if you're going to be taking about that, maybe even a little bit less in this race, which is decidedly tougher on paper.
Let's get to the favorite, Warm Heart. Now, I'll just make my mini case against, and I'll preface it by saying fastest horse with the best form. And if you want to just stop your analysis there, I'm not going to fight you too bad. But I think the 1.8 miles definitely has the potential to be sharp for her. And I think it's also being viewed. We've seen Coolmore do this before, where it's just what they would call a shot to nothing, what we would call a free roll. She's here anyway. She's going to see Justify, and they have a chance to pick up a nice purse and on the way out, and it's not going to hurt her one iota if she's an okay third or whatever. I have a feeling the board might tilt in her direction by the time it's all said and done. And again, while she can absolutely win, I thought it might be an interesting opportunity to shoot for a long shot. Matt, who's your idea of the winner here? And please tell me I'm nuts. Oh, we lost Matt for a second. He'll be back. I was seeing he was dealing with what looked like some hotel Wi-Fi, but he's down there more permanently than that. While we wait for Matt to return, Nick, I'll ask you the same question. What do you think of Warm Heart in this spot?
Yeah, I mean, look, Warm Heart's good races win this thing easily. But her good races have come at longer distances. They have come in scenarios where she was probably much more conditioned for that particular race. Hearing that this is going to be her final start, that she's on her way to Kentucky from here. Knowing that we've seen a lot of horses over the years that were just sort of Aidan O'Brien throw-ins, you get a little concerned that she's sort of a throw-in, right? That she's just kind of in there for the hell of it. Her value really doesn't matter. She's going to go and get covered by a Ashford stallion, and she's going to have a foal that they're going to race, right? So, I mean, you're not adding a lot of value. Now, my friend Pat Cummings said to me, it was a terrible version of the Hong Kong Vase last time out. I said, so tell me, how does a bad Hong Kong Vase compare to a good Pegasus turf? Right. I mean, let's not kid ourselves about what that means. The other thing is that, you watch that Hong Kong Vase, and I don't even really think it matters necessarily who the horses are. She really ran well against the grain of the race. I mean, she was in the teeth of that pace the entire way, and the 1-2 finishers come swooping over the top, and she fought her way all the way to the finish. So, I mean, she ran very well at 1.5 miles. The other thing is that, maybe you're a little bit helped if you like her. And again, I'm not going to go on a big rant about a 6-5 shot, but she was very much engaged early in the Breeders' Cup. And, that was a situation where that pace was strong and she was really never that far off of it. And she was grabbing the lead at the 8th pole. So, theoretically, the 1.8 miles probably shouldn't be much of a problem in a little bit more of a conventionally run race at a little bit slower pace. To me, it's about, so yeah, that's kind of where I landed on her.
I take that point. Would she be your top pick in here?
Well, I picked her on the Twin Spires show I did, and I refused to do the whole heresy thing where I pick different horses on different shows. So yeah, I'm going to pick her. I'm going to pick her reluctantly. I should have probably taken more time before I sent my pick in.
Feel free though to suggest some potential alternatives for those spreading in the Tropical Turf pick 3 and the pick 6.
Yeah, I mean, Integration is like super obvious, right? I mean, he's a horse that could really be anything. He began his career very impressively and beating Program Trading on the square in his second career start was terrific. And, he just ripped the face off those horses in the Hill Prince, did exactly what he was supposed to do. Who knows how good Integration really is. Right. We're going to find out. It's a great acid test for him. He drew favorably on the inside. So I'll definitely use him. And then I've got to use my old buddy, Jerry the Nipper. I mean, Jerry the Nipper is probably at a point where he sees Jose Ortiz walking up to him and he's like, no, not you, like anybody but you. Right. And with all due respect to Jose Ortiz, Eclipse Award-winning jockey, he has put forth a string of some of the most god-awful rides on Jerry the Nipper you're ever going to find. And the shame of it is that, like, somebody needs to realize that Jerry the Nipper used to be a speed horse. Like, and now he's dragged him out of the race every single time. He got totally shuffled out last time and ended up making this really strong late bid. I don't think that Fort Lauderdale was particularly good, but I'll tell you one thing. If you're betting somebody out of there, you're absolutely betting Jerry the Nipper. And Todd going blinkers on has not been a huge positive angle in the past, but it does sort of lead you to believe that even being willing to use Jose, Todd has said, this horse is getting way more involved early because he has enough speed to really be dangerous. I would be ill if this horse wins this race at 20+1, which I think he'll be every bit of.
I think you're right. I took a dim view of the Fort Lauderdale, but you are making a compelling case. The horse on his best numbers, if you pick and choose different sectionals, you can definitely conjure a case. There's worse 20-1 shots, maybe 25-1 shots out there. Matt, how about you? Who's your idea of the winner of the Pegasus Turf?
Sorry about the Wi-Fi. The apartment
no worries.
It's not great.
We covered it.
So it's interesting to hear you guys say, Pete, you're kind of against the Fort Lauderdale, and Nick, the only one you would want out of there is Jerry. I love King Max. I lost by a head a large stack of cash on December 30th. So I'm not just chasing this horse, but there is a little bit of history here. I firmly believe, and maybe other folks will disagree, that Inside on the Turf that day was absolutely a must if you were to run your best. And this horse was parked 5 wide basically the whole way around. He never changed leads. I get that, David Egan is a European rider and they're not conditioned to try to do that sort of thing. I think this horse can run. I think he's a proper runner, not just some sort of a clunk up piece. Obviously, if Warm Heart runs her best race, she probably wins. Integration could be anything, but this is, I think, probably the best he's ever faced. I'm not afraid to say it. I have no problem being completely wrong in this horse running second last, but I think all the AMO racing horses have run. King Max is truly the only horse I really want to bet on Saturday. It's just a matter of how do I get alive to him in some sort of a pick 3.
I love the confidence. I think you make an interesting point about the way the turf was playing that day. The horse has some kick. Egan's an excellent rider, and I think improving all the time with every with every ride down there. So I mean, the idea that he would have learned some things since then. I'm not going to be able to be won over because I feel like the way that I'm looking at the world, I'd have to include. I'd probably then have to end up, going too deep with those Fort Lauderdale horses. But it's not crazy. It's not nuts. My idea might be nuts, which is to give Cheryl Spite one more chance. I mean, I'm not the horse, had a perfect trip in the Breeders' Cup Mile and just wasn't quite good enough. But, sort of like Nick's point about the Hong Kong Vase before, like getting beat less than 3 in that race in the Breeders' Cup Mile. Doesn't that put you right there on the wire in a race like this? I think it might. And this is a horse that had a litany of excuses for the races since the overseas trip, where Randy Moss told the story about Fipke overruling Atfield with various decisions of where to run this horse, and you can see it right there in the PPs. I think this horse is really good. I think he might have one more big race in him. He's a grade 1 winner who has some strong numbers, and I think he's going to be every bit of that 15-1 price. I'm going to take a little shot there. The integration case is so obvious. I'm not missing that train. And then, in certain combinations, if I can include Masterpiece, and if it makes sense to include Warm Heart in some combinations where I have other prices in other legs, it's not like I'm against her. I'm going to list her as a B, but she's soft for me, and there'll be a lot of combinations where she's left out completely. It's a fun race. It's an interesting rendition where there's a lot of cool things that can happen. And I just going over this between what we're going to see in the filly and mare turf potentially from Star Fortress and what integration could be. These could be 2 very serious Breeders' Cup type USA based turf horses, and that's not something we get to see year in, year out. So I'm excited very much by the prospects of these turf races. This brings us, folks, to the main event, the Pegasus World Cup, grade 1 action. And this is a race where the more I look at it, the more I really, really want to try to get clever and come up with something at a little bit of a price. But the more I find myself, like, as I construct actual tickets, having trouble leaving off the favorites entirely because they just, they look pretty darn logical, even if not exciting to me. Really curious if you guys can help me focus my opinion here and help finalize some of these tickets that are rattling around in my head. Matt Bernier, we'll start with you and the key question when it comes to all these late picks on Pegasus World Cup Day. How are we going to get paid?
Hell if I know. Truth be told, I don't like any of these horses. I think they all have major flaws across the board. You're trying to marry yourself to a horse that you don't really like. That's when I immediately start shopping around. But it could end up being Captain Obvious, and the 2 best horses end up being National Treasure and First Mission, and it ends up being a rather boring result. I just don't like the Clark as a whole. I like Trademark. He's a nice horse, but I mean, if he wins the Pegasus, I don't know what to say. National Treasure wouldn't pass a parked car. I don't think he's going to make the lead with Hoist the Gold in here. I hate to say this. I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm probably going to go with Hoist the Gold. And I don't know that he wants to go a step past a mile, but I just don't have any faith in these other horses trying to rally from the back of it. And if Johnny is intent on making the lead, like it sounds like he told Dallas Stewart, prior to that run at Keeneland, right after the run at Keeneland, like, you got to ride the hair off of him. I know he probably took advantage of a pretty substantial speed bias at Aqueduct when he won the cigar, but I have way too many concerns about everybody else to just settle on 2-1 or 3-1.
Yeah, I hear you. And Hoist the Gold isn't nuts. I mean, when you look at the horse's blood, the mile and an eighth should be okay. He ran going the mile. Now, granted, he was flattered by the way the track was playing, et cetera, but he didn't look like he was gasping for air late. I hear it. I mean, a prop with very nice odds, reflective of the morning line, head to head, him versus National Treasure. I'd stab it at Hoist the Gold to end up proving the best speed in a spot like this. What about you, Nick? Who's gonna be, before we get to the winner, who's gonna be the best speed?
I would hope Hoist the Gold. I mean, it should be Hoist the Gold. National Treasure is not particularly fast on pace figures. He's actually, I want to say the Time Form US pace projector basically had him like 6th. It does not have him really squarely in the mix at all. And, what I fear is that this will become more of a rider intense situation. National Treasure also has a quick first step. So I do worry a little bit that he's going to get out of the gate quickly and start to kind of try and make a left coming out of the gate. The good thing about Hoist the Gold is that, the 3 horses immediately to his inside they're all taking back coming out of the gate. So, I mean, he should get a pretty easy trip to the first turn in terms of getting in there. It'd be awfully hard to believe that Johnny Velasquez is going to defer on Hoist the Gold, given the way he rode him in the Cigar Mile and the way he performed. I think it's pretty clear that he believes, as Matt was alluding to, that he's just a much better horse with the lead. And, National Treasure ran well in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. He also got a pretty easy lead, right? I mean, he had virtually no straw in his path and still, got run down by a superior horse. No surprise. So, yeah, I think Hoist the Gold ends up probably being best speed. And then you've got enough pressers in there that are supposed to force the issue along as well and just make sure they're moving with Grand Aspen and Skippy Longstocking to an extent, able to kind of keep things somewhat honest. I guess First Mission is probably not going to be too far off it. I mean, if you look at pace lines, First Mission's Clark is a way faster race than National Treasure's Dirt Mile. Right. I mean, in terms of the pace he was involved in. So I would imagine First Mission's got to be relatively close too.
And in terms of who's going to be there on the wire, Nick?
So I picked Trademark. I don't have a huge, this isn't me, stomping my feet and saying I love Trademark, this and that. I mean, I get it. I'm taking a Vicky Oliver horse in a pretty big spot. But she's done a great job with this horse. I mean, he's really overperformed on a number of occasions. I think I have at least a viable excuse for him at Keeneland 2 starts back. He was a little bit too close to that pace and maybe just expended a little bit too much energy. The fact that it's sandwiched by 2 really good efforts, I understand both were at Churchill, where he might just be a little bit better than anywhere else. But it seems like he's been good since she took him down to Payson. He has a recent bullet workout, so I'm assuming he'll be ready to go. The crazy thing is that not only was he 13-1 to First Mission's sub even money or nearly sub even money at 6-5, but he's going to be 5 times the price of First Mission again. Right. And for no reason whatsoever, it is not like something happened that gave him some clear advantage over First Mission. He just beat him. And in all likelihood, he's just going to beat him again. So, at a better price. So I figured I'd take him. I'd love to be clever enough to pick a horse like Senor Buscador. He has too much to do. And Gulfstream is not conducive to his kind of style. So I respect him. I think he's been a really fun horse over the years. And I could easily see him getting a piece of it. But I think winning's probably asking a little too much.
He was my pick, but I made very clear in all the other shows to say, well, I will use on top. Definitely one I'm going to want to be having in 4th and 3rd and 2nd, as much as I have on top, because Gulfstream. I mean, we'll see how the track's playing. But I do think there is some scenario where the 4 and the 7 go so hammer and tongs. And I think the time form algorithm is clearly pulling from the last several lines. If you just look at the last National Treasure line, I still don't think he's as fast as Hoist the Gold, but I do think he's fast enough if they both just say, no, I'm going to get the lead, that it could really set up for him to come running. And again, at least get a smaller piece in here. Under the same theory, a horse that I could see using in those same type of bets, more 3rd and 4th, maybe just a penny on top, a horse that I used the same cheesy line on in so many of my write-ups last year that I was doing for attheraces.com when he was running in big races. Il Miracolo would need a miracle to win this. It's probably not too much of a stretch to bust out the same old line this time around, but he's going to be on a ticket of mine at least, and certainly one that in some scenarios I play for a collapse, he'll I think it's okay to have him, especially in 3rd and 4th on tickets. Any other thoughts, Matt, on this race and how you might approach it vertically or horizontally, or is it as simple as what you said before?
I mean, the most annoying result for me is probably Dynamic 1. And I have nothing against the folks involved with the horse. I think he is a plotter of all plotters. And I don't know. I could see him running much better than I anticipate him running, because on paper, I just don't really see much of a case for him. But he's one that if he wins, I will certainly lose. And I guess it depends what your opinion of the Harlan's Holiday is. I don't think O'Connor should be completely dismissed. He can at least stay relatively close to the front end. I find it interesting that Gaffalione is listed on Skippy Longstocking and Paco's on this horse. I don't know if there's anything to that, but O'Connor was one of the few in that Harlan's Holiday that was kind of plugging along, making up some ground at the very end. If you think that you end up with a bit of a barbecue up front, maybe he can come along and get some pieces at which should be, I would think, close to that morning line, 6, 7, 8-1.
Back to Senor Buscador for a second. Brian was second guessing himself and this 20-1 line on the podcast I did with him before. I don't know. I don't know how this horse is going to get better or not. I'm very curious. What do you think, Nick? Just in terms of if you were trying to hang a line on Senor Buscador, he did get bet last time, but he doesn't typically get bet. And I think a lot of people might have that same idea in mind that Gulfstream just doesn't really project to be his course. He ain't going to be 20, but I'm not sure he's going to be. I mean, he might be 12 or 14.
Yeah, I mean, he was 29 in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and since then has a top fig for his career. So he's going to be about 8 or 10 to 1, in my opinion. I think he's going to be pretty well fancied. I think the problem, I think Brian was too aggressive with National Treasure. I don't think National Treasure is 9-5 shot in this race. I think he's probably going to be, he's definitely going to be favored. But I don't blame him for doing what he did. I mean, right, there's a lot of sex appeal to National Treasure. He's a Bob Baffert horse. He comes off a big fig. He just lost to Cody's Wish, who's, one of the most popular horses of all time. But I think he's probably about a 5-2 shot. First Mission is a massively popular horse coming off a fast race himself where he just missed. He's going to get a lot of money as well. So, yeah, I think Senor Buscador is going to have a pretty decent amount of appeal to people. And guys like you and I don't want any part of him at 8 to 1, right? I mean, he's not even a fun candidate at that price. Yeah, that's not that interesting. What you're hoping for is that we're looking at something a little bit more in line of along the lines of what Brian was anticipating. But again, I mean, it's a very tough race to make a line for, especially when you're starting at 9-5 on the favorite, because you're going to end up having some horses that drift up price wise in your line because you've dedicated so many points to the favorite. So you also want to make it so that the race looks as competitive as possible, because it really is. But like Grand Aspen was 10 to 1 in the Harlan's Holiday. It's hard to believe to me that he's 8 to 1 in the Pegasus, right? This is a totally different race, a much, much tougher race, even as well as he ran. So, I mean, there's a little mix around there, but yeah, I don't envy Brian's job, but I'd be a little uncomfortable having made Senor Buscador 20 to 1 as well. But, I once made a Brad Cox first time starter 8 to 1 that won at 4-5 by the length of the stretch.
You know what, though, to that point too, though, like you say, you're certainly not throwing shade at anyone. I mean, I think there's a real scenario in which First Mission is actually the favorite.
I totally agree. Wouldn't shock me at all.
But National Treasure's been the favorite one time in 10 starts for Bob Baffert. Right. First Mission's been odds on multiple times in his career. So I think a lot of people probably look at it and think, all right, Hoist the Goal, National Treasure hook up, First Mission tucks in, he gets first run. I could see a scenario in which he's 2 to 1, and like Nick said, maybe National Treasure's 5 to 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And it's actually kind of funny to note that you'd think a Triple Crown race winning Bob Baffert horse would just be the darling everywhere. And, right. This is a horse that, I feel like this horse went off 9 to 2 in the dirt mile. Part of it was sort of attrition, right? That field took such a hit race week in terms of participants that people eventually gravitated towards them. But I don't remember anybody telling me they liked National Treasure. I probably scoffed at them if they did. So, and I looked pretty stupid at about the 8th pole. But, he's a horse that you could see people being a little reluctant to embrace. The other thing is that, you don't need to be much of a clairvoyant to realize that this horse needs the lead. Right. And people generally don't like these kind, especially in a scenario where it doesn't look like he's going to get the lead. If he had the 3 and Hoist the Gold had the 12, then, you'd probably say that's going to take a lot of work from Hoist the Gold to get to the front. I think National Treasure is getting the lead. But, this is just one of those scenarios where him being isolated on the front end like he clearly needs to be, it just doesn't seem likely.
Doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like that's going to happen. I mean, we see so much strange stuff with rider decisions, and I'm not ruling it out. There'll be some 7s on the ticket for me, just for little academic purposes, some betting that people can actually wager upon internationally, just for some price comparisons. National Treasure 5 to 2, First Mission 3, Trademark 6, Hoist the Gold 9, O'Connor 10, Buscador 14, Aspen 18, Skippy 20, Il Miracolo 28. Dynamic 133, Nimitz class 40. So Brian's line doesn't look too bad based on, against actual betting, with maybe those couple of exceptions that you pointed out, Nick. But I mean, he's certainly in the ballpark doing a very difficult job. Speaking of difficult jobs, public handicapper on TV, Matt Bernier, apparently was lighting it up today at Gulfstream Park. Good work, Matt. Hopefully you keep the good form going throughout the weekend. Do you find yourself a streaky like that sometimes? You just just like
yes.
Horses or trainers or jockeys, you get in the good vein of form and just keep rolling with it.
It's been my life for as long as I've been betting on the horses. It'll be a month of I can spot dimes across the room. Then it'll be a month of I couldn't hit water if I fell out of a boat.
You remind me of the old
how it
Tommy.
goes.
If you don't know the Tommy Lasorda Bavacqua rant, this is worth listening to if you're any kind of baseball fan. And that line, so I think the idea was somebody accused them of throwing at Kurt Bavacqua, who I think was hitting about 192 at the time, and Lasorda, who may have been drinking. I'm just theorizing here. No hard proof. Bavacqua, you think we throw at Bavacqua? He couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. I'm going to send a limousine to pick up Bavacqua and take him to the ballpark. And on it goes. It's Earl Weaver worthy. Definitely worth checking out. We'll close it out with a question from Nancy. Thanks to everybody in the comments. Sorry I couldn't get to more of them, but Jeffrey and Peter and Chris, who always does such a good job in the comments. Jim, so many good things here. But Nancy wants to know, what jockey do we think is riding the Gulfstream turf course the best? That's an interesting one because we have some great turf riders who haven't necessarily been down there, who I always give extra credit to. But has anybody particularly caught your eye this meet, Matt, in terms of how they're riding the turf course?
Well, I mean, you can say this more often than not about him, but there have been multiple horses that Irad Ortiz has been on that at the top of the lane, I don't know, I would have made him 15-1, and they get up. Like he's just been timing things ideally. And again, he's the best rider that we have for the most part, on a day in and day out basis. So there's no real surprise there. He also happens to be on some of the best horses, but I think he's done a tremendous job as far as the timing of some of these rides has been, much to my demise and dismay, ideal, because I've been trying to beat him and he ends up snapping me at the wire.
Anybody stood out to you, Nick, lately at Gulfstream?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Matt. It's really unbelievable how consistently Irad rides, and he's on the best horse more often than not, but he certainly doesn't get in their way terribly much. I mean, it's the Paco Lopez phenomenon. I've always sort of marveled at. I've never seen somebody win so consistently and look so terrible on horseback. I mean, it is just one of the most unsightly things you'll ever find. But the guy gets into position more often than not. He's incredibly astute when it comes to saving ground. And, you always know that what you're going to get with Paco is he is basically going to try and take any edge on horseback he can. Right. If he's got a tight spot that he can put somebody else into to help his mount, he's going to do it. It's been to his detriment on multiple occasions, but he's going to do everything he can to try and get you to the wire. So I think he's ridden really well. And, he was about 30% when Irad showed up second week of December, and his numbers haven't fallen off all that much. And I've watched New York racing long enough to know that, when Irad gets back into the colony, a lot of the guys that are winning just fall apart, and that's not really been the case with Paco. I think he's ridden exceptionally well. He does ride the synthetic well too, which I think helps his numbers all in all. But he's ridden the turf pretty nicely, in my opinion. Also,
the comment
those two
about
have
Paco
kind of separated themselves from the
incredibly.
rest. It's not a knock, but it's those two and then everyone else.
Yeah. Obviously, with the boys coming in from out of town, there's that much more competition when you see Misters Dettori and Pratt around, but there's certainly guys you can upgrade day in, day out. The comment you made about Paco and the aesthetic displeasure at times did make me, two names pop to mind immediately. Bejarano at times can be like that, and Chavez, exactly. That was
nobody loved Jorge Chavez more than I did. I mean,
I loved him too, and Matt's too young probably to remember much of.
He looked so god awful on horseback. And you remember the best thing was he was like Chichi Rodriguez with his whip, right? When he would do the golf club and the putter and put it away.
Yes.
When he busted the stick out and his arms were so short, he would pull it out like it was a sword and then start wailing away on the front of them because he couldn't reach their hind end because he was so small. But he looked so bad. But boy, let me tell you what, mid to late 90s, good luck getting past a Jorge Chavez horse in the stretch.
And one thing I remember, random memory of him, is that he would seem to always find like the right path, like the tire track or whatever, on the wet racetrack. He was worth like half
always.
on the wet racetrack. But that style, that the ugliness with the bat, as our mutual friend Dan Illman would call it, would not play well in 2024 racing. There'd be a
Heisa rule called the Chavez rule, right? That you couldn't brandish that thing the way he did.
Oh, it's pretty funny. Guys, really appreciate you coming on. Didn't plan on going the whole hour, but so it is. We had great comments the whole way. Thanks to everybody who's thanking us. Again, you know, one of the reasons we love doing these shows is because you, the viewers and listeners, make it so much fun. We've talked a bunch about the betting pools that we've got going on Pegasus Day. There's extra bets in the middle of the card. There's an extra pick 4. There's an extra pick 5. There's the Pegasus World Cup betting challenge. If you're going to be betting big money, it's only an extra $1,000 to fuel the entry fee. So it's $5,000 you bet, and then $1,000 going to the pot, because there's $50,000 seeded in there. That gives you a very nice opportunity to walk away with more money than you came in with, and a real a positive equity situation if you want to play with proper theory and try to win the whole thing. That's going to be a lot of fun to follow along as well. Guys, well, thank you again. Matt Bernier, Nick Tammaro, you guys are the best. Fun to talk about these races, and you've definitely helped shape some of my opinions, and look forward to trying to get some of this money and see so many people out there at Gulfstream. We'll thank our sponsors from Gulfstream Park and First Racing, Pegasus World Cup Betting Challenge. One more time, pwcbc.com to get more information on that one. For Nick, for Matt, I'm Peter Thomas Fornital. May you win all your photos.